Welcome to Inside the Mask, the podcast where we cover off all your favorite horror movies with a true crime twist. This week is a special one, and as such, we'll be covering off a personal request of a live-action adaptation of a blockbuster video game franchise. It's the story of a missing persons investigation that, after a 20-year hiatus as a cold case, would come to a crashing conclusion. And while initial suspicions painted a local security guard as the prime suspect, the truth would be far more disturbing, and if additional local rumors are to be believed, may have in some part involved life-sized killer animatronics. I'm your host, Evan Taggart, and this is Five Nights at Freddy's. It's April in the year 2000, and local police in a small community respond to a domestic disturbance call in the suburban area. Now, neighbors here reported some kind of a commotion taking place at a residence nearby, and when authorities arrive on scene, police notes indicate that it didn't take them long to discover a deceased female inside the home. The victim, identified in reports as Jane Schmidt, was located in the main family room of the house, where she was determined to have been killed with extensive and massive blunt force trauma wounds to the base of her skull. Investigators assumed at the time that, given the fact that the victim was found to have been consuming a beverage at the time of her death, and that the TV in the room was also on, she was likely caught by surprise in her murder, although there were no signs of forced entry to the home. Now, a quick investigation into the homeowner's report indicates to police that Jane didn't actually reside at the house at which she was located deceased, and that the residence instead belonged to her nephew, named in reports as Michael Schmidt. At the time of the initial investigation, it was assumed that Michael Schmidt may have actually been prime suspect number one here, due to a number of factors. For starters, Schmidt had a recent criminal charge filed against him for a vicious assault that took place on or around the date of April 6th, during which the accused attacked a bystander at a shopping mall in a seemingly completely unprovoked action. Now, in addition to this, witnesses interviewed by police as well as court documents filed indicated that Michael had been in an ongoing legal dispute with the murder victim in question, namely over the custody and guardianship of Michael's own younger sister. With Michael and his sister both absent from the home, police now seek to bring Schmidt in for questioning, and the first place they check is his last known location, that being his place of work, where he operated as a nightly security guard. And that very same evening, as responding officers attended the once popular but now non-operational family restaurant, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, authorities would make a startling discovery, not only solving the murder of Jane Schmidt, but inadvertently cracking a near 20-year-old murder and abduction case that had haunted the community since the 1980s. To better understand the bizarre crime scene uncovered by police, as well as the culmination to a long-standing cold murder case in the area, we first have to dive into the history of the restaurant franchise itself, and a bit of local folklore that came along with it. Now, if we rewind back to the 1980s, over the course of the decade, police recorded a total of 5 missing persons in the area, and quite disturbingly, the victims were all children. Despite an exhaustive investigation, the children were never actually formally located by police, and as such, their kidnapper and their assumed killer was also never apprehended. There seemed to be no connective tissue tying the victims together at the time of the investigation, and due to the otherwise seemingly random selection process of these victims, the case would stay cold for 20 years. The gruesome reality here is that all of the victims in the case, as well as the future victims in the year 2000, would all share one commonality, and that was the local family restaurant and activity center, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, where, unbeknownst by both victims and police alike, a serial killer was using the restaurant as a hunting grounds to select his future victims. And in a turn that would prove to be haunting and disturbing, the child murderer in question was none other than the owner of Freddy Fazbear's, William Afton. Now, it's at this point well documented that while police initially suspected Michael Schmidt may have been involved or a possible culprit in the 2000-era killings, the serial killer operating out of the Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria location was, in fact, William Afton, who also went by the alias Steve Raglan, as well as his more infamous bunny-costumed moniker that he called Springtrap. Little is known about Afton's own history, beyond the fact that he was the owner and operator of Freddy Fazbear's in the 1980s, and seemed to be generally well liked by the community and patrons therein. As is showcased by photographs obtained as evidence by police, Afton could often be found on site during the operational hours, interacting with guests and even contributing to their own entertainment and amusement using his self-made bunny mascot costume, the aforementioned Springtrap outfit that he often wore. But this persona was nothing more than a facade, as William Afton was instead seemingly using this personality for unimaginable purposes to get close to and even select his own future victims. It's theorized that Afton would use his colorful and kid-friendly establishment as a way to lure his unsuspecting child victims to their own eventual deaths on the grounds of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, where he would then dispose of their bodies somewhere nearby. Now, while Afton himself was credited to the numerous murders in the area by official police reports, the rumors that persisted among the community, and specifically among the younger generations, managed to tell quite a different story. In what experts tend to agree likely started as a childhood boogeyman tale, eventually taking on a life of its own as the disappearances in the area would persist over the years, patrons and employees of Freddy Fazbear's instead attributed these local crimes to a truly bizarre origin, none other than the very Fazbear animatronics themselves. Now, to press pause here, yes, this elaborate story has no true connection to the disappearances or the various unconfirmed murders at Freddy Fazbear's. But you have to remember, the child disappearances and assumed murders in the 80s remained unsolved for a long period of time, and as such, stories and local fables as to the origins of these crimes tended to take on many forms. And one of the more popular stories in the area was that of these allegedly haunted human-sized animatronics at Freddy Fazbear's itself. To better understand how these rumors may have begun, we have to dive further into the animatronic characters and the then seemingly unrelated happenings at Freddy Fazbear's that may have actually supported these ghost-like stories over the years and contributed to their increasing popularity. So the animatronic mascots at the popular pizza franchise consisted of 4 primary characters. 3 were prominently featured in various onstage musical performances during scheduled showtimes throughout the restaurant's operation, and consisted of Bonnie the Bunny, Chica the Chicken, and the leader of the band and the mascot of the franchise altogether, Freddy Fazbear. Now, all of these animatronics were exactly as they sounded. They were larger-than-life, colorful characters designed with an almost stuffed animal-looking aesthetic, no doubt to appeal to kids and, unknowingly, to victims of William Afton. Other animatronics featured in artwork and present on site at the pizzeria included Foxy the Fox, a pirate-like character who had his own display in the facility, and Mr. Cupcake, or Carl the Cupcake depending on alternate trademarks filed, who was typically associated as a smaller, almost accessory-type piece to the more popular Chica the Chicken. Now, these characters were primarily designed to appeal to children. They were bright, they were colorful, and had exaggerated features. Mr. Cupcake, as an example, shown in artwork and photographs, was literally a cupcake with a giant goofy smile. But beneath these wondrous facades were potential disasters just waiting to happen. Ticking time bombs that many technology and engineering experts argue would inevitably go horribly wrong. As the years progressed, during the time that the kidnapping and murders took place and Fazbear's was becoming more popular in the area, reports of these animatronics showcasing signs of instability became more and more prominent. There's numerous staff records claiming that, specifically during the hours of the nighttime, the mechanized mascots would allegedly change positions from their designated spots in the facility, or that they would twitch and exhibit otherwise erratic movement patterns during regular hours of operation. And while at the time, owner and operator William Afton, not yet revealed to have had a much more sinister role in the case, would attribute these observations as pranks at the hands of the Fazbear Pizzeria staff members, or as minor glitches in the animatronics programming, the reality here would soon take a turn for the worst, causing irreparable damage to the brand and the eventual complete closure of the franchise location altogether. At some point during the late 1980s, numerous complaints regarding the animatronics' interactions with various children at the location were filed, specifically in that the mascot seemed to exhibit an almost aggressive physicality with the visiting guests and customers. One of these such interactions even resulted in the animatronic seemingly biting one of the attending children, resulting in a serious injury to the unidentified minor that required extensive medical attention. Now, because of this, and likely due to the accompanying rumors and stories circulating regarding the various child abductions in the area, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria ultimately closed its doors for good. And while these attacks at the hands of the Fazbear characters were attributed at the time to technical errors, experts agree that this was probably something that owner William Afton should have seen coming a mile away. And it all started from the design of the animatronics themselves. See, the mascots in question, while seemingly cute and cuddly on the outside, were inside made up of a series of dangerous and arguably irresponsible electronic contraptions. Patented designs uncovered in subsequent news investigations after the case concluded would show that the Fazbear animatronics had inner workings of sharp moving gears, as well as built-in security devices designed with an almost bear trap-like construction. Additionally, upon a search of the facility by police and investigators at the eventual crime scene in 2000, numerous abandoned and unfinished animatronics were also discovered to have had varying degrees of faulty wiring, all factors that may have no doubt contributed to the many mishaps over the years of the Fazbear Pizzeria's operation. Now, yes, there are the rather ghoulish ghost stories in relation to these discoveries, and we can't cover the case itself without at least mentioning them. Campfire-like tales claim that the animatronics themselves contained the spirits of the children assumed to have been abducted and murdered by William Afton, and that, quite gruesomely, their own bodies may have been concealed within these mechanical mascots themselves. This supernatural tale is also what locals attribute to the various reported self-piloted and erratic movement of these robots, as well as their attacks on guests in the pizzeria. That, if you believe the folklore, the spirits of these poor children were lashing out, haunting the very animatronics that may have actually lured them to their own demise at the hands of William Afton. However, these are considered by many to be nothing more than simple ghost stories. The facts, confirmed by official police proceedings, conclude that there was only one person responsible for the deaths and disappearances of local children in the area during the 1980s and the subsequent murders on site in 2000, and that man was William Afton. So how did Afton, a serial child killer who operated for many years in the area, seemingly get by unnoticed? And how was he able to return to kill again 20 years later without alerting local police? Well, for starters, Afton had adopted a completely new identity. At the time of the Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria closure in the late 80s, William Afton seemingly vanished. Now, many assume that this was to avoid potential lawsuits and public smear campaigns, but in reality, Afton had undergone an identity change. At some point, he began to operate under the name Steve Raglan, where he obtained a job as a local career counselor. Now, during this time, while Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria was closed to the public, it was still owned and operated, in fact, by William Afton, only under the guise of his alternate persona, Steve Raglan. And in a no doubt calculated effort here, Afton also used both personas to create the perfect alibi. Using his career counselor position, Afton actually contracted his own security guards to patrol the now abandoned Fazbear Pizzeria, while simultaneously retaining his ownership of the property itself. Now, this essentially allowed William Afton to ensure that no intruders or police presence would go unchecked on the property. And as such, any risk to Afton's exposure of his own identity or DNA links to the crimes and disappearances in the past would be nearly impossible. Well, that was until Afton's own security guard would inadvertently lead police to the discovery of the Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria crime scene, and ultimately, the culmination of the murder case that had now spanned the last 20 years. In what may have been a simple stroke of bad luck, or a healthy dose of karma depending on who you ask, the security guard in question here that was hired by William Afton was none other than Michael Schmidt, the same individual who police were now pursuing in their homicide investigation of victim Jane Schmidt at Michael's own residence in the year 2000. And, as mentioned previously, this potential coincidence would ultimately prove to be William Afton's own undoing, revealing his alternate killer persona to the world and resulting in his own violent death. William Afton was discovered dead by police at the final crime scene at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria in April of 2000. Crime scene photographs clearly show that Afton died from what appears to be numerous puncture wounds to the torso, as well as a single gunshot wound to the lower left quadrant of his body, assumed to have been fired by Michael Schmidt during a final confrontation with the killer on premises. And probably as is most famous in the case, Afton was found wearing his now decrepit mascot suit of his own, that of his killer alternate persona, Springtrap the Bunny. Now, forensics also seem to indicate that Afton may have been killed when, perhaps ironically, his own suit's built-in security measures seem to have malfunctioned, fatally piercing his torso with their bear trap-like mechanism and severing numerous vital organs in the process. Police believe that at some point during the evening, William Afton proceeded to the Schmidt residence, possibly to locate and murder Michael Schmidt or his younger sibling, and instead killed Jane Schmidt after discovering her inside the house. It's suggested that Afton would have then proceeded to Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria in an attempt to locate Michael, where he instead was himself killed in a fatal confrontation with this potential victim. And upon executing a search of the property at the pizzeria, investigators formally identified 4 individuals that were previously known to police, located deceased in the basement of the establishment. Now, some of these victims had been reported missing in the days prior and were discovered to have been killed by a series of excessively traumatic wounds to their bodies. The wounds in question were a combination of lacerations and penetrative wounds, as well as what appeared to be severe constricting pressure and blunt force trauma. It's assumed that William Afton was once again the culprit here, and given the criminal record of some of these victims, police assume that they may have at some point possibly broken into the facility and simply been killed by Afton in an extreme case of wrong place, wrong time. Now, interestingly here, forensic notes also mention that DNA samples matching these victims were found on nearly all of the animatronics in the facility: Freddy, Chica, Bonnie, Foxy, and even Mr. Cupcake. Though investigators believe that this was probably the result of blood spatter and cross-contamination as the victims were killed nearby the animatronics. The revelation of William Afton's exposed identity as a child murderer and serial killer, as well as the nefarious intent of the once popular Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, sent ripples throughout the community. In what was labeled by many as a perversion of innocence, the imagery of the vibrant animatronics, as well as Afton's own colorful Springtrap costume persona, contrasted with the macabre purpose of the family establishment itself, and the then unknown serial killer operating it proved to be almost too much to comprehend. But with William Afton's death, the community could finally move on from the tragedy that had plagued the area for 20 years, and now finally had some concrete answers and closure to the murders that may have put to rest the ghostly rumors of once haunted animatronics. Though if you find yourself in the area, you might still hear stories and daring children's tales that to this day, nobody has made it through more than 5 nights at Freddy's, perhaps proving that the haunted history of the franchise might actually transcend this initial case. Thanks for listening to our true crime spin on 5 Nights at Freddy's. This episode goes out to Evelyn, who celebrated her birthday this week and has long requested that we cover this movie. Happy birthday, Evelyn! I have to admit, when this movie came out, I wasn't really a 5 Nights fan, or FNAF as they call it in the gaming world. And despite being a gamer myself, I just kind of missed the trend when this series hit over 10 years ago. However, after seeing the movie, I decided to dive into the most recent FNAF game, and holy moly did I ever get hooked. The extensive lore and story of the games is just unreal, and I absolutely fell in love with the animatronics, so much so that I actually have played almost every single game in the franchise at this point. After doing so, I had a greater appreciation for the film, but I still don't think it was as good as it should have been, given the extensive source material. Now, the designs of the characters are so amazingly executed in the movie, and the aesthetic is really spot on to the games. The set designs, the look and feel of Freddy Fazbear's, the animatronics, they are all spot on. There's just one small problem for me here. It just wasn't scary. The games are notoriously famous for their jump scares, and the movie just really kind of misses the mark here. I mean, yeah, I think there's a few sprinkled in here and there, but they're just not scary at all, and overall, the movie just kind of fails to build tension for the most part. Maybe because they wanted to appeal to the younger crowd, I don't know, man. I know the movie gets some flack for being PG-13 instead of rated R, but I actually don't think that's the problem here. The games themselves aren't gory or anything, they're just great at building atmospheric dread as well as jump scares. And the movie just doesn't really have either of these things for the most part. It instead spends way too much time on the main character's search for his missing brother, where he hypnotizes himself to go back into his own memories or something, and then links up with the ghost kids haunting the animatronics somehow, and it's just unnecessary in my opinion. And the needless side stories just slow the movie down. It's a shame too, because when our killer robot friends are doing their thing, it's actually pretty fun. Anyway, there's a sequel coming out sometime soon, and at the time of this episode, the first trailer has been released, and it looks pretty awesome. So hopefully they amp up the scares there and we can keep the series going strong. I gotta get me some Roxanne Wolf from Security Breach at some point. Make it happen, movie people. And that's all for today's episode. Next week, we'll be visiting one of my favorite all-vegetarian country getaway locations with a modest population of 26. So be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on episode notifications so you don't miss it. As always, I'm your host, Evan Taggart, and this has been Inside the Mask.